The next budget deck is Poliwrath, another underused, underutilized card from the base set era. There were just so many water types at the time that were used heavily, mainly Blastoise and Articuno in Rain Dance along with Lapras, but those were all rare cards and it could get pretty costly to build a Rain Dance deck. Blastoise are 20 bucks each. And then also Articuno's and Lapras, even if you get the non-holo version, it can still be $3 or $4 each. Within my friend group, when we played the TCG, we would play with decks exclusively from the base set era, and one of my friends actually preferred this build of a water deck to that of Rain Dance, so great shout out to Evan. Whenever I got the suggestion to do more budget decks from the base set era, I immediately thought of Evan's Poliwrath deck. This water deck is a bit slower and way more defensive as opposed to Rain Dance, which is all about speed and hyper offense. So it's kind of the opposite of a Rain Dance deck as a water deck. Instead of relying on Pokemon abilities like Rain Dance, this deck has no abilities. Instead of using powerful attacks that have very high energy costs, this deck uses water Pokemon that have attacks for only 1 or 2 energy. And the Poliwrath line was easily obtainable. You could actually get a holofoil Poliwrath from the Hot Water deck from base set 2. And just to clarify, when I say budget deck, I don't mean I'm only going to use commons and uncommons. I mainly mean that I want to build decks that aren't heavily reliant on expensive cards. So the Machamp deck did have Item Finder in it, which was a rare card. And this deck also uses Last, which is a rare trainer. I mainly mean for this deck just to be a water alternative to Rain Dance because Rain Dance is such an expensive deck to build. So let's get into budget Poliwrath and see what cards are involved and how the deck runs. Starting with Goldeen, it's a pretty good card to start the game with since it does have an attack for only 1 energy. Ideally, you would be starting the game with this since its evolution Seaking is probably the most solid early game attacker that you can hope for a water card, really. So I'll be running a playset of Goldeen and, of course, Seaking. It also has an attack for 1 energy, so even if you can't get a second energy on turn 2, you'll still be able to attack with that added HP. So both Horn Attack and Waterfall, low cost energy-wise, but if you can start getting waterfalls off on turn 2, dealing 30 damage per turn early game is actually really great. Seal is another strong basic. It's got 60 HP, which is a little bit above what's normal for a basic that has an evolution, and Headbutt is a 1 energy cost attack. Now, Dugong does have some higher energy attacks, so those are going to be more for middle or late game when you're going to start bringing those out. You can always retreat that Seal and bring a Dugong in later in the game. Poliwag isn't, too bad of an option if you have to start the game with one. 40 HP is a bit limiting, but Water Gun is still an attack that you can get off on your first turn. So the way I'm laying out these cards is kind of storybook style, where you're wanting to start the game with Seaking and then retreat once you get a Dugong or a Poliwrath set up on the bench. The Dugong's going to be more for middle game because it does have a little bit of disruption with it as well, but you really want to keep the Poliwags on your bench. That way you can start evolving into Poliwhirls and later Poliwrath. Once you get those cards into your hand, this deck isn't very heavy on draw power, so you will be focusing on just getting energy on your Pokemon and attacking very early game. Like I said, this Poliwrath is part of a structured deck, so they're not too hard to come by. They're not an expensive card either because there were just so many other big water types at the time that this one was underused, so the value never shot up for any reason. Because it's a very defensive deck, you're going to be using attacks like Whirlpool a lot to kind of disrupt your opponent while also using Potion to heal up your side of the field. Dugong and Poliwrath both have some pretty high HP. Seaking's pretty good for a stage 1, but Potion's going to help you heal back those energies, stall out your opponent a little bit while you're dealing a decent amount of damage every turn. Defender is in here for the exact same reason. You're going to be able to throw this down on your Pokemon and prevent a little bit of damage from being placed on them. Defender can actually be pretty disruptive for Haymaker decks And it's also going to prevent you from getting O-code by any kind of Rain Dance variants you're up against, because reducing that damage by 20 can actually make a big difference in the damage output that Rain Dance can do. And Energy Removal is a great defensive card against decks that utilize double colorless energy like Wigglytuff. And these are all trainers that you're probably going to be using the same turn you get them in your hand. So as soon as you get a potion, throw it down, heal up your Pokemon, get a defender on it. Use energy removal to disrupt your opponent as soon as possible. And that's where last comes in. You can play last from your hand, and that's going to force your opponent to get rid of trainers that they've been holding on to. Maybe an energy removal or a super energy removal that could really hurt this deck. You can play last, and by the time you're playing last, you have already used all the trainers in your hand, so it's not going to hurt you. Gust of Wind is mainly for early game when you're trying to get your setup. If your opponent outspeeds you, like I said, as soon as you get a Gust of Wind in your hand, go ahead and play it. Get something as your active before you play last. And then I have 2 Professor Oaks in here, mainly just for early game draw power. If you're lucky, you'll get a Professor Oak in your opening hand. That way you can get a lot more basics and evolution cards to go ahead and play down on the bench and start setting up. And that way by turn 3, you're going to be more likely to have a Dugong or a Poliwrath to bring out, because this deck does run double colorless energy. Unlike Machamp, Poliwrath and Dugong can really benefit from double colorless energy. And Ice Beam on Dugong as well as Whirlpool on Poliwrath can be really annoying to play against. They're not only dealing a good chunk of damage, but if you can start getting Whirlpools off on turn 3 and just spamming those every turn, dealing 40 damage but also discarding whatever energy your opponent played onto that Pokemon this turn, you're really going to put their active in a hard spot. So they're going to just abandon it, basically, start loading energy and building up what they have on their bench. That's when Gust of Wind can come into play. If your opponent has abandoned their active because you're discarding all the energy with Whirlpool, then you can just drag out whatever they're building up on the bench. Start using Whirlpool on that. And the worst matchup you can have with this deck is actually probably Rain Dance, because this deck relies heavily on using Whirlpool to discard those energy, using energy removal to kind of disrupt your opponent, and Rain Dance circumvents all of that because it can lay down as many energies you want per turn. So in that case, you'd want to focus more on Dugong to paralyze your opponent instead. For other matchups, this deck actually fares pretty well against Haymaker. Poliwrath itself isn't weak to lightning, so Electabuzz isn't going to bother it as much if you can get a Poliwrath out quickly. And also, Hitmonchan isn't going to be able to deal damage faster than you can heal it if you get those potions and defenders in your hand fast enough. Since this is a deck that takes 3 turns to really kick in and hit its stride with its setup, it isn't really fast enough to deal with Wigglytuff or Mewtwo, but where this deck really shines is in its matchup against Damage Swap. Damage Swap doesn't use a lot of energy, so discarding them over and over again can really hurt that deck when it's trying to get Mr. Mime set up. And this deck runs a lot of copies of Seal, Goldeen, Poliwag, all which can deal damage to Mr. Mime. Within the base set era metagame, this deck actually fares pretty well. If you can get the jump on a Wigglytuff deck or a Mewtwo Haymaker deck, then you can play those lasses early and force your opponent to maybe get rid of plus powers that they would need to knock you out, or even super energy removals that they have on their side. For a budget water deck, I think that Poliwrath is too much of a staple. It's too good to ignore. That Whirlpool attack can be really disruptive and it deals a good chunk of damage. But Seaking, Dugong, these Pokemon are kind of interchangeable. There's a lot of water Pokemon that you can swap in to fit your playstyle, namely Pokemon like Kingler, Starmie, and Tentacruel. All have their own pros and cons that go along with them. I prefer Dugong just because it has higher HP and the potential to paralyze, which could really help this deck. And I really like Seaking's ability to attack for 30 damage on turn 2, which can be really helpful if you have a slow start deck like this one. So I got a lot of positive feedback from the Budget Machamp deck, and I really like the idea of doing more budget decks for the base set era. It seems like something you guys really like, so if you have suggestions for that, leave them down in the comments. I'm currently putting together a fossil deck of sorts as suggested by David, so if you guys have anything, leave some feedback, and until next video, bye!